Natalie Myers had dreamed of owning her first home since she was 19. It had taken her 12 years of work, saving, and hustle plus one soul-draining breakup and 3 apartment leases to finally pull it off. Now, 31, she was moving into her own house, a modest, sun-kissed 2-bedroom on Sycamore Ridge. Inside the Maple Glen neighborhood, she pulled up to the curb in a dusty silver Honda, a U-Haul trailer dragging behind her like a weary companion. As she stepped out of the car and took in the tree-lined street and the soft rustling of wind through hedges, she finally let herself breathe. That peace lasted 7 minutes. Natalie had just unlocked the front door when a figure appeared on the walkway clutching a clipboard, dressed in pastel pink, and wearing a fixed smile that didn't quite reach the eyes. "Hello there, you must be the new homeowner," the woman chirped, her heels clicking against the concrete. Natalie blinked. "Hi, yeah, just moved in literally 5 minutes ago." The woman extended a manicured hand. "Karen Winslow, president of the Maple Glen Homeowners Association." "Oh, you age, nice to meet you." Karen's handshake was brief, but her eyes scanned the driveway like a hawk. Then her face tightened. "Oh dear," she said, pointing downward. "You may not be aware, but that all stain from your vehicle is a clear violation of our community code." Natalie looked down. Sure enough, a dark splotch of oil engine grease had pulled beneath her Honda. It had been leaking oil for weeks, something she meant to fix, but between closing paperwork, packing boxes, and quitting her job, she hadn't gotten around to it. "It's just from the move. I'm planning to get it serviced." Natalie started. "I understand," Karen interrupted. "But unfortunately, we'd require immediate compliance. I'll be issuing a citation. $125. Nothing personal. Just policy." Natalie blinked again. Now slower. "Wait, are you serious? I haven't even unpacked my toothbrush." Karen was already scribbling on the clipboard. "Welcome packet should have been mailed with your closing documents. Driveway cleanliness is section 6.2 under the property appearance clause. It's all there." Natalie opened her mouth, then closed it. She had no clue what Karen was talking about. She was still thinking about where she packed her coffee machine. With a practiced flick, Karen tore the slip from her pad and handed it over. "Your payment options are listed at the bottom. If it's not paid in 7 days, a late fee applies." Natalie accepted the paper, slowly. "Okay, thanks, I guess." Karen smiled again, just lips, no eyes. "We're a very tight-knit community. Rules keep everything beautiful and fair. We look forward to seeing you at our monthly meetings. They're mandatory for new residents." And just like that, she turned on her heel and walked away, leaving Natalie standing on her own driveway, holding her first fine as a homeowner. She looked down at the oil stain again. Then she looked at the pristine white houses around her, each one seemingly built from the same blueprint, with matching shutters, trim lawns, and clean driveways. It was like moving into a postcard. But Natalie felt like she had just stepped onto a stage she hadn't rehearsed for. That night, as she unpacked her mattress on the living room floor, her phone buzzed with a notification from an unknown number. It was from the HOA. Subject: driveway violation. Due date: 7 days from notice issued. Failure to comply may result in lien enforcement. Natalie stared at the screen. "A lien," she whispered, "over an oil stain." Her hands trembled a little, not from fear yet, but from the sharp realization that she wasn't just dealing with some fussy neighborhood rulebook. This wasn't going to be a peaceful homecoming. This was a war of appearances, and someone had already decided she didn't belong. Natalie woke up the next morning to the steady buzz of her phone vibrating across the wood floor. She squinted at the screen. Another HOA email. This time, the subject line read, "Inspection fee added. $45. Compliance officer visit." Recorded. Her stomach flipped. She hadn't even been there 24 hours. Her boxes were still stacked in the hallway. Her shower curtain lay unopened, and somehow she was already racking up fees like a delinquent tenant. Natalie threw on a hoodie and stepped outside to get some air. The morning was quiet, sun breaking gently over the rooftops, The kind of peace people paid extra for in neighborhoods like Maple Glen. That illusion shattered when she noticed something new, a small, dark device mounted to a wooden post on the corner of her front yard. It was angled slightly, just enough to give it away a motion camera, pointed directly at her driveway. She crossed the lawn and stared up at it. It blinked red. That wasn't hers. A voice startled her from the sidewalk. Don't bother waving. They don't care for introductions. It was Glenn Thompson, an older man with silver hair and a Vietnam vet cap. He stood by his mailbox across the street, arms folded like he'd seen this scene play out before. You talking about the camera? Natalie asked. Yep, Glenn replied. Karen had those put up last fall. Said it was for safety after someone left their porch light on too long. Natalie raised her eyebrows. That's absurd. Glenn nodded. So are most of the rules around here. You should see the bylaw book. It's thicker than the tax code. You cross Karen once, and she turns your mailbox into a war zone. Natalie sighed. She already gave me a fine for an oil stain. First thing she said to me. Glenn gave a bitter chuckle. Welcome to Maple Glen. She hesitated, then asked, why doesn't anyone stop her? She runs the board. Picked her friends to be on it. Most folks here are too tired to fight. Or they already tried and lost. He tapped the brim of his cap. Not me, though. I've been here 25 years. I remember when this place had a soul. Natalie looked back at the camera, the blinking red light staring her down like a challenge. Her peace was gone, but now something else took its place. Resolved. Later that day, Natalie called the HOA office and demanded a copy of the bylaws. She was told she could review a copy in person at the HOA clubhouse, but not take one home. That didn't sit right. Still, she made an appointment. When she arrived, Karen was already there, sitting behind a fox mahogany desk with a laptop open. Miss Myers, Karen said without looking up, we weren't expecting you until 3. It is 3. Natalie replied evenly. Karen finally looked up, her face practiced and neutral. You're here about the rules, I presume? Natalie nodded. And the inspection fee? I never agreed to anyone coming onto my property. Karen tapped her screen. All inspections are permitted under the HOA charter. You signed it during closing. I signed a dozen documents that day. I didn't know I was inviting surveillance. Karen gave a shrug that could have won awards for indifference. Our job is to maintain standards. Compliance is impersonal. It's protection. You want this to remain a desirable place to live, don't you? Natalie stared her down. Desirable for who? Karen didn't answer. Instead, she slid a printed document across the desk. Your fine schedule is on page 12. Late penalties compound weekly. I'd recommend quick resolution. Natalie left the clubhouse gripping the packet tightly in her hand, her jaw clenched. They were trying to bury her in rules, drown her in silence and red tape. But she wasn't going under. That evening, she bought her own security camera, a small one, just enough to catch anyone who decided her lawn was public domain. Because if they were watching her, she'd be watching back. Natalie had been in Maple Glen less than 2 weeks. She'd unpacked half her boxes, met 3 decent neighbors, and received 5 HOA notices. What started with a driveway stain had turned into a pattern and not a random one. It was targeted. She learned that quickly when a notice arrived for overgrown vegetation on her front lawn. Natalie stepped outside with the paper in hand. Her grass stood no taller than 2 inches. Still green. Still neat. She even measured it with a tape measure just to be sure. The next day, the HOA sent a follow-up email. Final warning. Lawn maintenance non-compliant. A fine of $75 was added. She looked across the street. Glenn's lawn looked like a jungle. By comparison, no notice. No fine. Natalie took pictures, sent emails. No response. Then came the trash violation. One evening, she wheeled her bin to the curb at 7:30 p.m. Pickup was the next morning. By sunrise, a fresh yellow slip was taped to her mailbox. Trash bin visible overnight. $50 fine. Section 3.1. She stared at it in disbelief. Just down the street, Two other bins sat out even earlier. She knocked on one of their doors. An older woman with frizzy gray hair named June. "Oh, I leave it out at 5, June said with a shrug. "No one ever complains." Natalie held up her own slip. "You didn't get one?" June frowned. "No, never have." It was happening. She was being singled out. That night, Natalie stood in the shadows behind her blinds and watched at 2:16 a.m. A figure appeared, a woman in a hoodie, carrying a flashlight and a clipboard. She approached Natalie's bin, took a photo, then slipped away silently. Natalie reviewed her security footage to confirm what she already knew. It was Karen, the HOA president herself, was prowling around at night documenting her every move like a predator building a case. Natalie saved the footage. The next day, she received another email, this one more aggressive. "Unapproved modifications, mailbox paint color non-compliant fine, $100. Natalie stared at her mailbox, a soft teal, cheerful, yes but clean, freshly painted, and no less tasteful than the lemon yellow one 3 houses down. Karen had referenced section 2.4, neutral street-facing fixtures. The words neutral tones only echoed in Natalie's head, like a threat wearing a smile. She decided she wouldn't pay another cent. Later that week, she walked into the HOA clubhouse and asked for a meeting. Not with Karen, she wanted the entire board present. A man named Greg, listed as the board secretary, agreed to set it up, quiet, with a nervous energy. Greg seemed uncomfortable the entire time they spoke, avoiding eye contact and wringing his hands. "Can I speak freely?" he asked. Once the room was empty. Natalie nodded. "I've seen what she's doing to you. You're not imagining it," Greg whispered. "But if you try to fight her outright, she'll bury you. She's done it before." "Why doesn't anyone stand up to her?" Natalie asked. "Because she knows the rules better than anyone. Twists them." She was on the bylaw revision committee 3 years in a row. Natalie leaned in. "What if I had proof she was enforcing them selectively? Maybe even harassing residents at night?" Greg hesitated, then said, "If you can prove that, you won't just shake up this board, you could get her removed." Natalie went home with a burning purpose. She compiled everything: photos, emails, comparison images of homes that hadn't been cited, and most importantly, the nighttime footage of Karen sneaking across her yard like a suburban ghost. She posted the footage anonymously on a local community forum titled, "Does Your HOA President Patrol?" At 2 a.m., within hours, it had over 150 views. Comments poured in. "She did this to me last year. Glad someone finally caught her." "Karen fined me for my garage being open during dinner." "She watches everyone like we're inmates." The stories matched hers, different details, same pattern. Natalie wasn't alone. She wasn't crazy. And she wasn't done. Because this wasn't about fines anymore. This was about power and taking it back. After Natalie exposed the HOA's late-night stalking tactics, something shifted. In Maple Glen, it wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was real. Neighbors started waving more. A few even knocked on her door to say, "I saw the video. You're brave," Glenn called her. The first real threat Karen's faced in years. But Natalie knew better than to celebrate too soon. Karen didn't back off. She doubled down. One morning, Natalie stepped outside to find her trash bin overturned, garbage spilling into the street. 2 hours later, an HOA citation appeared in her inbox: property cleanliness violation, improper waste containment, $60 fine. Natalie marched out to retrieve her security footage, and there it was. At 5:03 a.m., a shadow moved near her driveway. A hand reached out. The bin tipped over. The figure darted out of frame. She couldn't see a face, but she knew. The next day, her backyard motion sensor caught someone unhooking a small piece of her garden fencing. That evening, she received a warning for unsecured backyard perimeter. Natalie didn't say a word. She didn't reply to the emails. She simply added the clips to her growing folder. She was documenting everything now. Still, Karen was careful, never facing the camera, never speaking, always just outside the legal line. and Natalie could feel it a campaign designed to wear her down, inch by inch. Then one night, Natalie woke to the sound of tires screeching. She scrambled out of bed and looked outside. Nothing seemed out of place until she saw her mailbox. It was smashed, split in two. The wood fractured like it had taken a direct hit. She checked the footage immediately. At 2:42 a.m., a black SUV rolled slowly past her home, then reversed and gunned it straight into the mailbox. The plate was covered. Natalie filed a police report, but they told her without a plate number or clear facial ID, it would be difficult to pursue. She knew what this was. Karen wouldn't risk touching her herself, but Maple Glen was full of people Karen had manipulated for years. People who owed her, people who feared her. Natalie patched the mailbox, again painted it teal, and posted a new photo on the same forum. Caption: Round 2, mailbox versus HOA, till still wins. It went viral within the community. Over 300 comments in 2 days, but it also drew attention from someone unexpected. That night, Natalie received a message from a private number. Meet me behind the Maple Glen tennis courts, 10:30 p.m. Come alone. She stared at the screen, weighing her options. She went behind the courts. In the dim glow of a single flickering light, she found a man in his 40s, holding a brown folder. "I'm not here to scare you," he said. Quickly, "Name's Josh. I used to be on the HOA board. Karen ran me out." Natalie kept her distance. "Why are you reaching out now?" He held up the folder. "Because what you're doing is gutsy. And because I kept this." Inside were records, financial logs, meeting notes, and itemized HOA reimbursements. One line caught Natalie's eye. Security audit, $2,450. Paid to K. Winslow. She flipped to the next page. Dozens of entries labeled administrative travel and community sanitation with Karen's name listed as payee. Josh looked over her shoulder. Half of those were never approved. She submits them after meetings and tells the treasurer it was an emergency. Natalie's heart pounded. Why didn't anyone report this? They tried. But Karen's protected. She used to date the attorney who handles the HOA's legal filings, and most of the board's scared of her. Natalie looked up. "Are you willing to go on record?" Josh hesitated. "If you get the right people involved." "Maybe." Natalie took the folder home, scanned every page, and sent a copy to a local investigative reporter named Avery Chen, a journalist who covered crooked HOA schemes before. The subject line read, "HOA harassment, financial abuse," and the woman behind it, she didn't know what would happen next. But as she turned off her lights that night, Natalie no longer felt alone. She wasn't just fighting to keep her home anymore. She was fighting for everyone Karen had silenced in the shadows. Natalie expected the board hearing to be formal, professional, maybe even tense. She imagined a round table, a handful of neutral faces, and at least one chance to explain herself. What she got instead was Karen's living room. The chairs were mismatched. A plate of stale cookies sat and touched on a coffee table. And in place of a legal hearing atmosphere, there were smiles tight-lipped and practiced from Karen and her two loyal board members, Connie, the treasurer, and Howard, the compliance officer. Natalie didn't miss the fact that all three had wine glasses in hand. Karen greeted her with that same plastic smile. "Natalie, so glad you could make it. Let's be quick, shall we?" Natalie looked around. "This is the hearing." Connie gestured toward the only empty chair. "We like to keep things informal. Community over conflict." Natalie sat down, but kept her bat on her lap. Inside was her folder, thick with evidence, security footage, screenshots, copies of notices, photos of neighboring violations ignored, and most importantly, the financial records Josh had given her. Howard pulled out a notepad and began reading off her violations. His tone was flat and mechanical, like he was reading off a grocery list. Driveway oil stain unresolved, mailbox paint color non-compliant, trash left out beyond posted hours, grass height exceeded regulation, fence disrepair rear perimeter, east side. Natalie raised a hand. "I'd like to respond." Karen didn't look up from her wine glass. This isn't a debate. Natalie kept her voice steady. You've cited me for violations that other homes on the same block were never fined for. I have pictures to prove it. I've brought them. Karen set down her glass. You're welcome to submit documents. We'll review them and make a decision in private. Natalie opened her folder anyway and slid the photos across the table. That's Greg Thomas' house. His trash bins are out every Tuesday night. Never fined. This one's June Carter's lawn. It's longer than mine. No notice. Why is that? Connie glanced briefly, then looked away. Howard didn't even bother. Karen gave a tight sigh. As we've said, Natalie, it's not personal. These rules apply to everyone. Natalie didn't blink. But they're only being enforced against me. Karen sat up straighter now. Her voice shifted. Steel under silk. Sometimes new homeowners need time to adjust to the standards here. It's not uncommon for growing pains to create friction. Natalie didn't respond. She pulled out the final page from her folder and HOA financial record with Karen's name attached to thousands in unapproved reimbursements. She placed it gently on the table. This is what this is really about, isn't it? She said calmly. Control, intimidation, and covering your tracks. Karen didn't look at the paper. Her eyes locked on Natalie's. Cold, calculating. I think we're done here. Connie cleared her throat. The board will meet privately and provide a written outcome within 10 business days. Natalie rose, gathering her papers. I'm not waiting 10 days. I've already forwarded everything to a local journalist. You'll be hearing from her soon. That got Karen's attention. The corners of her mouth twitched. Just slightly. You're making a lot of noise for someone with such a short record here. Natalie paused in the doorway. Maybe. But the silence before I got here is what let you get away with this for so long. Outside, Natalie climbed into her car and exhaled. Her heart pounded. But her mind was clear. They thought this would intimidate her, dismiss her. But they had no idea who they were dealing with now. 2 days later, the HOA emailed her the official outcome. All violations stand. Fines are final. Further non-compliance will result in property lien proceedings. Natalie didn't even finish reading it, because that same morning, her phone buzzed with a new email. Subject line, Karen Winslow, HOA president under investigation for financial misconduct. Avery had published the story, and the neighborhood, it was paying attention. The war wasn't over, but the silence was, and for Natalie, that changed everything. By the time the sun rose over Maple Glen the next morning, Natalie's inbox was flooded, not with HOA fines this time, but with messages from neighbors. Some were short, thank you for standing up to her. Others detailed similar horror stories. She fined us $200 for a basketball hoop our kids barely used. We were too afraid to fight. It was as if the entire neighborhood had been holding its breath for years. And now, Natalie had let the air out. The article Avery had published was spreading like wildfire. Local HOA president accused of financial misconduct and selective harassment. Her inbox pinged with media inquiries. Homeowners from nearby communities reaching out. And even former Maple Glen residents sharing horror stories. But one email stood out. It was from Greg Thomas, the board secretary who'd warned her weeks ago to be careful. Subject, I think it's time we talked. He offered to meet at the dog park just outside the neighborhood. Neutral ground. Natalie showed up early, standing near the chain link fence as Greg arrived. He didn't bring his dog, just a warm manila folder and a nervous glance over his shoulder. I was on the fence about this, he admitted, but after the article, it's clear you're not backing down. And someone needs to tell the truth. He handed her the folder. Inside were board meeting minutes, real ones. Not the versions Karen had submitted to the HOA website, but raw, handwritten notes. They told a different story. Natalie flipped through them. There were meetings where only Karen and Connie were present, but still, major spending decisions were approved. Security audits, lawn spraying contracts, a new website hosting service, $1,200, paid to a company owned by Karen's cousin. She's been laundering HOA funds for years, Greg said. Not huge amounts all at once, just enough to avoid raising eyebrows. But it adds up. Natalie looked at him. Why didn't you speak out? I tried once. She found a way to accuse me of neglecting my duties, tried to vote me off the board, said I had a conflict of interest because I helped my neighbor fix their fence. After that, I just kept my head down. Natalie didn't judge him. She understood now how Karen operated. She didn't need power. She needed fear. Greg, lean closer. If you really want to take her down, you need to find the shadow account. Natalie frowned. What account? There's another fund. Not the main HOA checking. She called it the reserve pool. But it's never been on any official budget. She used it to pay vendors she didn't want the board seeing. Natalie's pulse quickened. Do you know where it is? Greg nodded. All I know is it's under a different name. MG Neighborhood Reserve Fund. You'll probably need help tracing it. Natalie called Avery that same evening. They met at a cafe off Route 29. Natalie handed her the folder, relayed everything Greg had said, and waited. Avery scanned the notes. If this shadow account exists, it could be the nail in the coffin. But it'll take some work. HOA funds aren't as regulated as public accounts. They operate in a gray area. Natalie asked, Can you dig? Avery gave a small smile. That's what I do. Over the next week, Avery made calls, cross-checked EINs, traced bank routing numbers through public financial disclosures, vendor invoices, and HOA payment processing systems. And then she found it. An account registered in the name MGNRF Holdings or business shell located in a small town across the state line. It had received over $37,000 in wire transfers from the Maple Glen HOA over 3 years. It wasn't just mismanagement. It was embezzlement. Avery reached out to the State HOA Regulatory Board, who launched a formal inquiry. Meanwhile, the neighborhood buzzed louder than ever. Some residents were angry, some embarrassed, but most were relieved. Natalie's phone rang just after midnight. It was Glenn. You did it, kid. They're opening the books. Karen's being audited. Natalie sat on her porch, staring at the soft till mailbox she'd refused to repaint. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt grounded. It wasn't over. But for the first time, the fight felt real, and she was no longer standing alone. The week after the audit announcement, the Maple Glen community stood still. Lawns went untrimmed, porch lights stayed off. The usual passive pleasantries disappeared. Everyone was watching. Everyone was waiting. But Karen, she carried on like nothing had changed. She still strolled through the neighborhood in her pastel suits, still held courtesy inspections, and even sent out a newsletter claiming that baseless rumors were threatening the harmony of Maple Glen. Natalie kept her head down and watched her phone. Then it happened. Avery texted her 3 words. We got it. They met late at a public library parking lot. Neutral ground again. Avery's eyes were fierce, her laptop bag slung across her shoulder like a weapon. Inside, she pulled up a document. MGNRF Holdings, a shell company registered in Karen Winslow's maiden name. Its listed address, a vacant storage unit 2 towns over. The account had received regular deposits from the Maple Glen HOA's main account, small ones, spaced out, masked under vague vendor labels. Community development, contract audit, sanitation service fees. But here was the twist. Avery had pulled bank statements. The funds hadn't stayed put. They'd been withdrawn. Regularly. Always in cash. Always just under the IRS reporting limit. Over $41,000 had disappeared. Natalie stared at the screen, stunned. She's been stealing from the entire neighborhood for years, Avery confirmed, and laundering it quietly under the guise of upkeep. But here's what makes this a bombshell. She used HOA funds to pay for personal travel, home renovations, even luxury landscaping, all under false names. Natalie felt sick, and no one noticed. Most HOAs don't undergo audits unless someone raises red flags, Avery said. You were the red flag, Natalie. Avery had already forwarded the findings to the State Housing Board. They confirmed a full investigation was now underway, not just into Karen, But into the entire Maple Glen horror executive team. Then came the next move: public exposure. Avery's article dropped the following morning. HOA president diverts over $1 for OK into secret account. Maple Glen residents blindsided. It hit the local news within hours. And this time, it wasn't just online outrage. By noon, a group of residents gathered at the Maple Glen clubhouse. Not for a meeting, not for cookies and wine. For answers. Natalie stood toward the back, quiet, watching the crowd swell. Glenn was there. So was June. And surprisingly, Greg, the board secretary who once tried to stay invisible, stood near the front. Then Karen arrived, dressed in white, sunglasses on, like she was walking onto a golf course instead of into a firestorm. People shouted. Questions flew. Is it true? Where is the money you used our dues for your house in Palm Beach? Karen raised her hand, tried to speak, but no one listened. Greg stepped forward, holding the audit results. I motioned to suspend Karen Winslow from all HOA authority pending full investigation by the state housing board, he said clearly, effective immediately. People cheered. Karen tried to interject, but the crowd drowned her out. You manipulated the bylaws. Someone shouted. You fined my grandmother for having a wind chime. Everything I did was to protect this community, Karen snapped, her voice cracking. I gave this place standards. Order. Natalie stepped forward then, calmly, firmly. You gave it fear, and you used those rules as a weapon. But they only worked because no one spoke up. Karen's face reddened, but she said nothing because she had no defense left. By the end of the day, Karen had been formally removed as acting president. The board, under Greg's interim leadership, voted to open all financial records to homeowners. An emergency election was scheduled. The audit results were sent to state authorities, and Karen, she packed up quietly the next morning. A white SUV pulled out of her driveway at sunrise. No one waved goodbye. Natalie watched from her porch, arms crossed. She didn't smile. Not yet. Justice wasn't about celebration. It was about restoration. And Maple Glen was just beginning to heal. It had been 2 months since Karen Winslow left Maple Glen. The pastel perfectionist who once ruled the neighborhood with a smile and a clipboard had vanished without a farewell, but her shadow remained. Natalie stood in her driveway one Saturday morning, sipping coffee, watching a group of kids ride their bikes down the street. No one barked at them to get off the sidewalk. No fines arrived for unauthorized street activity. The air felt lighter, freer. Still, the work wasn't over. Inside the clubhouse, a new horror board sat around a folding table covered in open folders and laptops. Greg had been elected president in a unanimous vote. Natalie had agreed reluctantly to serve as a board advisor. I didn't move here to run meetings, she told him. Greg just grinned. You didn't move here to lead a movement, either. But here we are. The new board's first act was transparency. They printed every financial report from the past 5 years, posted it online, mailed hard copies to every homeowner. There were apologies, refunds, even community listening sessions. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Natalie used her platform to push for 2 reforms: an external audit every year, a homeowners oversight committee separate from the board. Both passed with overwhelming support. Neighbors who had once kept their heads down now volunteered for projects. They landscaped together, held potlucks, repainted the community bench Karen once banned for being a shade to lime. And Natalie, she finally repainted her mailbox, but not to white. It stayed teal. Because now, it meant something different. Narrator shifts tone slightly, hopeful, yet reflective. The State Housing Board filed formal charges against Karen Winslow for embezzlement, fraud, and abuse of authority. Investigations into similar horror complaints in surrounding neighborhoods began. Within weeks, turns out, Karen had consulted for multiple associations and left behind the same pattern of secret fees, backdoor contracts, and silence. Avery's story went statewide. Natalie's name was mentioned, but she kept interviews short. She never made it about fame, It's not about being the face of anything, she told a reporter. It's about people not being afraid to say, this isn't right. One evening, Glenn walked up to Natalie's porch with a small box. You earned this, he said, handing it over. Inside was an old brass key. Attached was a tag that read, the real key to the neighborhood. Natalie smiled, tearing up a little. I didn't do it alone, she said. Glenn patted her shoulder. That's the point. Months later, Natalie sat through one last HOA meeting, this time with the community gathered under string lights in someone's backyard. Laughter echoed, a grill sizzled. Kids darted between lawn chairs. The HOA wasn't something to fear anymore. It was just a structure. One meant to serve people, not control them. Greg tapped his glass. I'd like to propose one final motion tonight, he said with a grin, that we retire Section 6.2 of the bylaws. Laughter broke out. Natalie raised an eyebrow. The all-staying clause. He nodded. I think we can live without it. Everyone voted yes loudly. Narrator's voice softens, closing the circle. Natalie moved into Maple Glen expecting peace. She got war. But in fighting for her own right to belong, she gave that same courage to everyone else. No more late-night patrols. No more secret finds. Just a neighborhood learning to be a community again. One lawn, one mailbox, one teal color at a time.